In today's era, it seems as though part practice has become the de facto practice, and there needs to be evidence or a reason why one should do whole practice instead of part practice. This is the opposite of how it should be. We should always start with the game. The game is most important, and the game is the reason why we play. The game is the reason why we practice. We practice to increase or improve performance in a game. We don't practice simply to get better at practicing, an isolated skill. Therefore, when we start with the game, to decide what type of part practice we need to have a reason for that part practice. Typically, we want to overload a skill, or we want to increase the number of repetitions of that skill compared to what is available in a full game form. So if you look at a 5-on-5 game, for instance, over the course of, a high school game, a 32-minute game, or even a college game of 40 minutes, a player might only get 10 or 15 opportunities to shoot. And so because of this, we separate shooting and we work just on shooting to try to increase the repetitions involved, because we assume that that is an insufficient number of repetitions to become a good shooter. So we separate it out, we isolate the single skill to practice it. And so those basically are the reasons why we should be separating away from the game, is to do some form of overload or to do some form of increasing the repetitions. However, we want to stay as close to the game as possible. We want to keep as many of the constraints of a game as possible. So our first step in moving from whole to part practice should be simply making the game less complex or finding ways to increase repetitions within a game environment. So reducing the number of players. If we start with a 5-on-5 game and then instead we play 3-on-3 over that same amount of time, a 32-minute or a 40-minute of 3-on-3, players are going to get many more repetitions with the ball, many more repetitions of shooting, dribbling, making layups, etc., within a game environment that still maintains many, if not all, of the same task constraints as a 5-on-5 game, simply with a reduced complexity because of the lower number of players on the court and the lower potential interactions, and the increased space that is afforded by having only 6 players in a half-court area as opposed to 10 players in the same area. If we want to make that more complex, then we could potentially reduce the space and play in a more confined area and play 3-on-3 so that the dimensions of the court more closely mimic the dimensions of the court in a 5-on-5 game. And therefore, then we have the same type of complexity in terms of timing and spacing, but we have more repetitions involved because of the reduced number of players. Now, if we decide that this isn't enough, we still can't get enough repetitions, then maybe we have to reduce it further, maybe to 2-on-2. And if we can play 2-on-2 on 6 baskets in the gym at the same time, maybe we can get sufficient repetitions through playing 2-on-2. Maybe it's a matter of playing 3-on-3, but we put certain restrictions, or modifications or constraints on the game so that we increase the number of outside shooting opportunities. So maybe if we really want to focus on shooting, we play 3-on-3, but we prohibit scoring inside the 3-second area. So all the shots have to be some form of jump shot, whether it's a pull-up jump shot, inside the 3-point line, or whether it's a 3-point shot. So there are other ways that we can manipulate the rules or add constraints to potentially increase the number of repetitions on a specific skill that we're trying to practice. But if we're unable to get the number of repetitions that we desire out of a practice situation, then maybe we reduce further. And so then we can go to some of the drills that I'll link below, but the 3-man, 4-man, 5-man shooting drills that I like to do that incorporate some movement and a little bit of decision making into a shooting drill, but also increase the number of repetitions because we're not playing a full game. And then if we decide that a player needs more repetitions on a specific part of his shot, now we're reducing even further and worrying more about the technique, and now we could go into more of an isolated drill where we can create an environment that really focuses on that single aspect of the shooting. So maybe the player needs to get a higher release or shoot the ball with more air under it. And so we can create a drill that just focuses on that. And so we're continually getting further and further away from the game, and making the practice more and more part practice. But we're not moving immediately from 5-on-5 game to stationary, one person, one ball, isolated shooting, because that's very far from the game form and almost completely unrelated to the game form. So I think this is the way the players or the coaches think about skills, is we think about the skill as being that isolated individual person shooting a basketball by him or herself, and that's the fundamental, and then we just magically shoot in a game when presented with that opportunity. Whereas to me the skill is shooting in a game with all the different constraints and all the different decisions that go along with shooting, and then the beginning drill, the stationary shooting, the uncontextual or non-contextual shooting drill is an opportunity to just work on one facet of that for a small amount of time to correct something that is missing in the game shooting. And so rather than spending hours and hours on this non-contextual shooting, that's something that we should do when it's necessary, when there's a mistake or something that really needs to be fixed, and then get the player back to a game form as quickly as possible. And this is the same for all of the skills. A lot of times we talk about doing dribbling drills, and we want to overload a dribbling drill by dribbling 2 balls at the same time. So that's how we're going to overload the dribbling skill. But the more appropriate way to overload a dribbling skill is to increase the speed or the pressure demands, because that's what we have to adapt to in a game environment. We don't have to adapt to dribbling 2 balls, which is simply working on coordination, which has value especially for younger players. But for high school, varsity, college, NBA type player, the overload that we really want is to speed up their ability to make decisions, to make accurate decisions under more and more time and physical pressure. So instead of overloading with 2 balls, it'd probably be better to overload with 2 defensive players and play some form of 1-on-2, whether that's 1-on-2 to score, whether it's 1-on-2 to advance the ball and to make a pass into an offense, different variations. But increasing that defensive pressure and overloading it beyond what one faces in a game. Again, we can reduce the amount of space to become more consistent with how much space a player has in a game. So if you have a 94 by 50 foot court with 10 players on it, you have X amount of area, and then if you're only going to play 1-on-2, you only have 3 players on the court, so you can reduce the area of the court by 1/3, which is what a lot of coaches will naturally do in zigzag drills. Although with only 2 players in a typical zigzag drill, you should reduce further if you want to get the same dimensions as a game. So if we reduced and only use, let's say, 1/3 of the court, it's the same basic area as one faces with 10 players on the court and a full court. And so the constraints are similar. The amount of time and space between players would be similar. And so now you increase the time pressure and the defensive pressure, and that's how you overload the skill, while maintaining many of the same task constraints as you would face in a game. Whereas doing a 2-ball drill, theoretically you're overloading the skill because you're using 2 balls, but it has no contextual relationship with what occurs in a game. And so being good at dribbling 2 balls in a stationary position really says nothing about your ability to handle the ball effectively against a defensive player and to make the accurate and appropriate pass at the right time with the right amount of force on the pass to get the ball to beat a defensive player, or to beat a defensive player and make the decision to attack the basket and be able to account for the variables in front of you to know whether to go for a layup, to pull up for a jump shot, or to pass to a teammate. So again, too often I think our de facto drills are the part practice, and we ignore the whole practice. Whereas we need to start with the whole practice and work backwards. And if there's a problem, then we can either increase the number of repetitions, or we can overload the skill while trying to maintain as many of the same task constraints or make the task as representative as possible to a game situation. Because ultimately, the entire purpose of practice is to improve game performance.